The thing that's probably on a lot of our minds in this room is what we plan to do with our lives. If it wasn't already on your mind, it is now, and you're probably furious with me for bringing it up on your day off, but bear with me. Whether you're the type of person who has known from a young age what you've wanted to major in and what your career would look like from start to finish, or if you're still figuring that out, I think we can all agree on what maybe the typical path will look like after, say, undergraduate graduation. You get an internship, you intern for 1, maybe 2 years, you get an entry-level position, you maybe get another entry-level position, and you get to this point where you feel like, I don't have any more meaningful substance to contribute, so you head to grad school. After 2, maybe 3 years, now you finally feel like you're in the position to think about what you actually want to do with your life instead of just accruing job experience. We can agree that this pretty much sounds like an inevitable sequence of events, right? That's definitely what I always thought, and did, until I found myself at age 22 asking for a job I was grossly unqualified for. I had interned for an organization back in college, and 2 weeks before graduation in 2011, that organization approached me with a contract-based offer for a whopping 3 months of certain employment. I took the offer, but meanwhile had been yearning to work on President Obama's re-election campaign. So after those 3 months were up, the organization told me they would renew my contract, but again, not permanently, and I took this as my cue to pack everything up and move to Chicago to work on the president's re-election campaign. There was no certain job, but I got an internship working with the LGBT fundraising team. About a month and a half in, the deputy director of the program got promoted elsewhere, and I thought this was my shot. Surely this was a sign. So I arranged a meeting with my boss, I sat him down, and I said, I'd like to throw my hat in the ring to be your deputy. He all but laughed in my face. You see, I had just graduated from Michigan not but 5 months prior, had no fundraising experience, had barely any professional experience for that matter, so it shouldn't have come as a shock when he said he wanted to go with someone with more experience. Looking back, I can't help but laugh. I was 22 asking for a job that someone with 5 years of experience would be qualified for, not 5 months. But you know what? I think that if I hadn't simply had the gall to ask, this wouldn't have happened. A few months later, my boss approached me with a job. I was the new Deputy National Director for LGBT Fundraising and LGBT Voter Outreach for President Obama's re-election campaign. And I think that if I hadn't simply spoken up, the thought might not have ever crossed his mind. I believe by asserting myself and having the confidence to suggest that I was qualified enough for the job, perhaps I truly created the impression that I was, and I became the candidate he was looking for, simply by having the confidence to ask. Now, this is easier said than done, right? Asking. There's something called the Imposter Syndrome that psychologists at the California Institute of Technology define as a collection of feelings of inadequacy, even in the face of evidence that suggests the otherwise. For instance, the fear of being found out, right? For not knowing as much as others in the room. Countless studies have shown that the imposter syndrome has plagued women and people of color in professional settings. It stymies their profession to actually trust in their abilities to meet their fullest potential because they feel like they're on the brink of being found out because there's some sort of fraud, even though they're clearly qualified to be in the job. And I think the imposter syndrome affects us young people in a unique way. Since we're young and inexperienced, many of us already feel like imposters. And so we fear even asking for the job because we fear of putting ourselves in the position where we could feel the imposter syndrome. It prevents us from even putting ourselves out there. And so, naive as I was at age 22, I trusted in my abilities, right? I had the confidence to ask for something I really cared about, even though on paper my qualifications might not have matched up. I like to think of this as my hack. And no, I'm not talking about a hack as gaining unauthorized access to a certain movie studio's email database, or a certain activist group that publicly shames on social media high-profile wrongdoers, although those are great. The way that I like to think of my hack is the way that the tech sector would define it, or actually the way that Urban Dictionary defines it, which is a clever solution to a tricky problem. And I like to think of my life hack as visually collapsing the rungs on a career ladder. And I'm not talking about a corporate ladder, although if that's your path, by all means, visualize that. But what I mean is hacking away at the steps, hacking away at some of the rungs on this ladder, those inevitable steps that we feel like we have to go through in order to get to a place where we actually care about what we're doing. I'm reminded of the quote from the brilliant Amy Cuddy, who's a behavioral scientist, and she tells us we should fake it until we become it. We should use our body language to exude the confidence to convince ourselves that we're good enough. But how do we become someone who is still inexperienced but qualified enough to ask? We reframe and reclaim our disadvantages as advantages. And to do that, the first thing you need to think about is to know what you don't know. This is powerful. Think about all the things you don't know in the context of a job or opportunity you want. Write them down. And thinking long-term, this is a great exercise to identify what you need to work on. What are my disadvantages? I have maybe 4 years of professional experience, and that's a little generous. I have a short resume, I'm not published, and I just have a bachelor's degree. The list goes on. In the example of my campaign story, I didn't know the first thing about political fundraising. I didn't know which LGBT community leaders in Columbus, Ohio I needed to engage. And I didn't purport to, because I also knew what I did know, right? And when you know what you do know, in contrast to what you don't know, and you think honestly and clearly about those things, this contrast allows you to reframe those disadvantages as advantages. So the way I framed my limitations, but as positive aspects, were on the campaign, I had cultivated great interpersonal and relationship building skills a lot of my time in college, which rendered me a good fundraiser. I had a keenness for learning and learning quickly, and so even though I didn't know specific knowledge, I would work really hard and learn on the job quickly. I had and still do have a passion for LGBT issues and social justice issues, and I had a fresh perspective. And there's a beauty, actually, about being young in the professional world. For one, you have energy. I personally was well accustomed to pulling all-nighters in the fishbowl, something that unsurprisingly helped me on a campaign. For another, you likely don't have a demanding personal life, a partner, children, family, and those are actually attractive qualities about you, I'm not kidding. And I truly believe that there's an advantage when it comes to having a lack of professional depth. Those who've been working in a field for years, maybe even decades, are used to operating through a business as usual type of approach, maybe the status quo. A lot might be burnt out. But you, as an energetic newcomer, likely from a different generation than the veterans in your field, are able to approach problems and ideas in a completely different way, right? In an innovative way. And I think that is a true advantage. So let's start to think about our disadvantages as advantages, right? Let's turn those weaknesses into strengths. And in the areas where you know you don't know, make sure you're growing and make sure you're learning as possible, because if you plan to keep hacking to the other steps on your career ladder, you gotta make sure that you're learning and growing as much as possible. And above all, it's gotta be something you care about, or I doubt this hack will work. I have felt unqualified for every job I've had. There are times where I walk into the White House and I'm in a meeting with brilliant people and I feel like an unqualified fraud. But then I think about, if that were the case, I wouldn't have been hired. And I remind myself this constantly as I feel this imposter syndrome creeping in. And I want us all to remind ourselves of this. Because too often, we assume the attitude of an unqualified fraud and don't even try, right? We don't even ask. And so, naive as I was at age 22, I trusted in my abilities, right? And I want us all to trust in the things that we know we're good at and aim not just high, but higher. I think about, the 22-year-old me who asked to be hired on a national presidential campaign right out of college, or I think about the 25-year-old me who asked to serve at the White House. I want us all to think about aiming for not just high, but higher for those jobs that we think we're not conventionally qualified for. Now, I'm not saying you should ask to be the President of the United States tomorrow. Please don't. I'm not saying you should ask to treat patients before you've ever attended medical school. Again, please don't. This is not blind confidence or cockiness. This is acknowledging that you have limitations, but there are positive aspects about you that deem you a good, qualified candidate. So let's reframe those disadvantages as advantages. Let's have the confidence to trust in those abilities and then ask. And now you've not just faked it, you've become this candidate that you think is qualified, right? That potentially your dream job is looking for. And so I want us to stop having this internal mantra of, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not qualified enough. Because we've just run through this exercise where you do know what you do know. And you're good at those. And those positive aspects are worthy enough with your meaningful experiences from college and whatever limited experience you have, the passion you have. Those are all qualifications for you to actually reach for jobs that you deserve. So just ask. Yes, it's scary to think that you're young and asking for a big job. Yes, it's scary to be young and feel like you don't have the tools to succeed at that big job. But that fear should never prevent us from achieving, well, greatness. Thank you.